James. Because I never know what my role is when I get asked to do that. So is it as a community member? Hello. No, I never know. So I have to keep reminding myself today that I'm here as a mom. Because that's what she asked me to do. My role as a mom. But I'm sure I'll say things as a parent.
Test.
Because I read the whole book. I bought it for myself on Monday. And it actually is a great book. I enjoyed it. Yeah, I enjoyed it. And it seems so simple but so difficult here in the shop way to do some of these things. So I'm sure as a parent, a lot of things got triggered with me when I read it, but I have to speak as a mom. So I'll say the first stupid thing, and then you'll be fine. You'll be fine. Ditto to that stupid thing.
Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our November Superintendent's Conference Day. Can I please ask you to all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We are on a little bit of a tight schedule this morning. We have a lot of great activities for you. So I'm going to get started just with a few remarks. Please remember to sit apart, physically distanced, socially distanced. There are orange cards on the seats, and I know that some of them have fallen off. So just use those as a guide and make sure that you are seated apart and make sure you're wearing your mask. And thank you for that. So good morning and welcome to our November Superintendent's Conference Day. It really does seem like yesterday that I was just standing here on our opening day. I don't know where the first 2 months of school went, but time really does fly. I quickly want to thank Mr. DiTomaso and our Professional Development Committee, Mary Arapis, Melinda Best, Gail Byra, Emily Brostuin, Caitlin Castellano, Tony Ann Donald, Ryan Fisk, Gary Gregory, William Gibbons, Vincent Healy, Rob Kennedy, Ann Kerner, Brad Krause, Emanuela Matthews, Aisha MacArthur, Kaylin McNoble, Pam Morano, Janine Patain, Alexandria Pietrantonio, and Joseph Polite for their work in planning for today's workshop and activities. So that's quite a committee. Thank you to all of you for volunteering and thank you for your effort. It's not an easy feat planning for so many different people with all the different districts' interests in 3 buildings amid COVID. Let's not forget that. Thank you as well to Ryan Fisk and Vinnie Healy for their assistance in designing the electronic schedule. Makes things so much easier today, so you always have it with you. I know that you will have an interesting and engaging day ahead of you. So I want to take a few minutes to talk a little bit about one of the main topics of today, and that is equity, inclusivity, and diversity in education. As I know you're aware, the Board of Education adopted a new and critically important policy this past August. This policy, it's number 0105, Equity, Inclusivity, and Diversity in Education, which, by the way, was included in your annual sign-off of policies this year, so I know you have read through it. But it's pretty dense, and so there's a lot of information in there to process, so we won't be giving you a quiz on it, don't worry, no Kahoot quiz on the policy. The board, we really are so proud that our district began this work several years ago. It is a little bit of a lightning rod, as I'm sure you've seen in other districts, but our district took this on and was very committed to the work. And we worked with a NYSBA, which is New York State School Boards Association. They provide us with sample policies, and they had a beautiful policy that really encapsulated all of the major concepts of this concept. And we worked with that as the model for our policy. And as you know, it's quite lengthy and there's quite a bit of information in it. And the board adapted it to meet the needs of our school district. I lost my place. So this policy affirms the district's commitment to this vital work and helps to outline the how for us moving forward. If you look at the regulations portion, you will see that aside from the actual policy, which says what we stand for, what we believe, the regulations give some suggestions, and they're not limiting, as to how we will go about doing this work. And as you know, those of you that have been here, we've been committed to this work for several years, but the policy gives us a lot more purpose to the work and really helps us to formalize the work with the support of the policy. The policy states that the district is committed to creating and maintaining a positive and inclusive learning environment where all students feel safe, included, welcomed, and accepted, and experience a sense of belonging and academic success. I don't think anybody can argue with such a powerful statement like that. The policy, which I said I know you've all read, asserts that all children deserve to have equal access to opportunity regardless of the color of their skin, their gender, their sexual orientation, the language they speak, or their background. This freedom is fundamental to our K-12 education program and is extended to everyone without exception. Racism, discrimination, and marginalization of any people or groups of people, whether intentional or not, have no place in our schools, our district, or our community. We are committed to addressing these inequities and helping each and every student to equitably access learning opportunities in school to enable them all to thrive and build a better society. So those are not just words, that's now policy. And I really can't help, I want you to understand the power of that. It's not what I believe, it's not what Mr. DiTomaso believes, it's not what Dr. Kaplan believes, it's what our Board of Education and our school district believes. It's policy, and it's something that we need to live by as we move forward as a school district in all that we do. And I really want to affirm that, and I want to applaud our Board of Education for taking on this work because, as I said, many districts are not here yet. They've not yet adopted policies for various different reasons. So thank you to our Board of Education. Equity and inclusive education are an ongoing process that requires shared commitment. I'm reading some of the quotes from the policy. And leadership if a district is to meet the ever-evolving society, unique learning needs of all students, and diverse backgrounds of our communities and schools. The board understands that equity and inclusive education is achieved when each adult collaborates and affirms each student by creating a respectful learning environment inclusive of actual or perceived personal characteristics. And that's what we're doing now. We're continuing this very important work because it is up to you, our faculty and our staff who are on the front lines with our students every day to create that culture. And it goes beyond culture. It's about our deliberate actions that we take in our schools to ensure that all of our students feel that they belong in our school community. These are such powerful words, but more importantly, our Board of Education and district have taken a very important step to create this policy to not only support the work, but to ensure that the work happens. And it's my responsibility as the superintendent to operationalize or enact these policies. So you will be seeing more coming forward as we increase our commitment to the work that is discussed in this policy. We have been committed to this work for the past several years, as you know, in our district, and this year we will renew our focus and our efforts on this work. One, because we now have the policy, which must be fully actualized, and two, because this work is more important than ever in our current society. To continue building upon our efforts to create an inclusive school district in East Rockaway, Dr. Nancy Kaplan, who many of you are familiar with from her work with us in the past years, will be joining us today. Dr. Kaplan is here. Give her a welcome. So we will begin the day with a panel discussion that Nancy will moderate. In planning for the day, we thought that starting off with a panel discussion comprised of our own faculty and staff was important to begin a dialogue on the critical importance of creating a school community that is inclusive and grounded in dignity for all. We hope that as a result of the panel discussion, you will hear and learn from your colleagues' multiple perspectives and lead us to recognize the need for everyone to share in the responsibility of creating a sense of belonging for one another, the children we serve, and their families. You will also have another opportunity during our breakout session to work with Dr. Kaplan and explore the book, Belonging Through a Culture of Dignity. And many of you may have already received a copy of your book. Each of you will receive this book. It's by Dr. Floyd Cobb and John Crownapple, who lay out how honoring dignity, the innate equal worth of each human being simply because that person is human, is the way to equity in schools. Our commitment to this work is ongoing and is by no means a one and done workshop. You will be hearing more as we move forward this year and in the coming years as we plan with your support to grow our commitment to dignity, equity, and inclusivity to truly create a district where every student will experience a true sense of belonging. I would like to thank our panel for their willingness to share their personal thoughts on this topic, and I am so appreciative of them being here today to help us with this important work. So I will now turn the podium over to Dr. Kaplan and our panel, Melinda Best, Gail Byra, Christine Del Valle, James DiTomaso, Joyce Kenny, Aisha MacArthur, and Crystal Valentine. And thank you again. And I hope you all enjoy the day. And turn it over to Dr. Kaplan. Let's give her a warm welcome.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thank you so much. Lisa, thank you so much for your warm welcome. It is really my honor and my privilege to be back here this morning. I want to commend, everybody in the district, starting with the Board of Education, your superintendent, Lisa Ruiz, Mr. DiTomaso, everyone on this panel, the people that I met last year. What's happening in this district is really special. I have worked with a number of districts. I go in for a few hours, we have a conversation, and that's really where it ends. And your district, and I think it's apparent, is really very, very committed to making sure that every child, every family feels like they belong in East Rockaway. And that's a credit to all of you. As Board of Education members, administrators, we can have a vision, but it's all of you that carry out that vision each and every day. And so I'm grateful to all of you, and I'm thrilled to be back here. So we thought it would be a great idea for you all to hear from people within your district, from their perspective, why this issue is so important. And so, Mr. DiTomaso, I'd like to start with you, and everyone will respond to this first question. What does an inclusive school district mean to you from your perspective in your position?
So I put a lot of thought into this, and an inclusive district is, as Lisa had mentioned, where we provide opportunities and where we can create opportunities where all our students belong. Just to give you a little history, if you can remember No Child Left Behind, there's been regulation that started this many years ago, and I'm happy to say that the East Rockaway School District has provided that. A little bit more recently, DASA regulations have also reminded us about equity, inclusivity, and diversity. What I'm excited about today is that we're going to hear some of the fantastic things that we are doing in the district and how we can continue to grow as a district. So when putting together the panel, we decided that this would be the best way to do it, to hear what we already have in place. And again, I will mention, we are already doing many fantastic things that I want you to hear about, and also how we could move forward. And when I mean move forward, I don't just mean in the classrooms, but opportunities for everyone for extracurricular activities, for participating in clubs, all school events, to make sure that all our students belong.
Thank you so much. And of course, it does start with opportunities. So that commitment is really fantastic. Thank you. Aisha, can I ask you to respond to this question in your role as principal of Rames School? What does an inclusive school district mean to you?
Okay. So from my perspective, being a building leader, I look at inclusivity more in terms of making sure that every person from every walk of life has a seat at the proverbial table. That we're not just looking at the ideas, the beliefs, the values, the gifts and talents that come from a select few, from the hardest workers, but that there's an entry point for every person who's in my building, in all three buildings, to be able to leverage their expertise, their knowledge, their values, to be able to make decisions that are going to be in the best interest of the students of East Rockaway. So as a building principal, I think about how do our policies at the district level create that space for everyone to be able to sit at the table and contribute to decision making. How are our hiring practices reflective of that? How are our pedagogical practices reflective of that? How does our curriculum reflect that? That there needs to be an access point in every tangible and intangible aspect of the way that our school district functions, as the way that all of our schools are structured, so that we're re-envisioning our culture. We're not looking at addressing bias and dismantling bias, but we're looking at how do we transform our learning environment so that there is true inclusion of every person from every walk of life, not just our students, but also our staff members. So how are we starting to shift our thinking, shift our practices, shift our policies, so that there is true inclusion, because that's really where the work starts. Diversity, we have diversity just by nature of who's here. We have to have equity because we have to have access for everyone, because that's the fair and right thing to do. But how are we really including all voices at the decision-making table at every single level? That's really how I look at inclusion from my perspective as a building leader.
Thank you. Thank you. Crystal, can I ask you to respond to the question, in your role as the high school librarian, what does inclusion mean to you?
Well, in the role of the high school librarian, inclusion means that we have a diverse collection of authors, genres, characters, even books in many languages. And if, looking at our collection development, and we realize that there are certain cultures that are not being represented or that are lacking, or character storylines based on certain genders, we immediately create a list for ordering those materials, because we want to make sure that everyone is included and that all students are able to see themselves in the books that are on the shelves. We also just constantly research book reviews and attend Junior Library Guild's Day of Dialogue in order to see who are the up-and-coming authors and trends that are associated for our students. We want to make sure that we build anticipation for what's on the shelves and that they can see themselves in the books that they read.
Great, thank you so much. I think I'd like to go to Christine next. You have a very interesting perspective as a high school monitor and as well as a parent. So I would ask you to share what you're thinking.
Sure. I'm not as prepared as everybody else, but I'm going to tell you that what an inclusive school district means to me as a monitor, if I'm in that role, it means a little something different maybe if I'm a parent, but as a monitor, I think it means that students are heard, and I think that they are accepted and for the position that they're in at that moment, whatever's going on in their lives at home, whatever's going on in their lives at school. I am in a kind of unique position, because we deal with really all the discipline that's going on, where I really walk around all day and tell kids what not to do, essentially, but I think for me, it's like, how do we shift that perspective? I just had an incident this week with a student, and I had no idea that things were so difficult at home for him. And it completely shifted my mindset, because he's a difficult student. He can be very obnoxious, but it's changed something in me where now I can approach him in a different way and try to, we're there a lot to listen. And I think a lot of the monitors are good listeners. So that's what inclusivity means to me, really kind of stepping into the shoes of the students that we have here.
Thank you so much. Let's go to Gail. And Gail, I'm really interested in your perspective, both as a teacher and as president of the East Rockaway Teachers Association.
Sure, thank you. I have to find my $10 for the microphone for Christine Del Valle, apparently, since we're sharing equity access. So one of the things I think as an elementary teacher that we do currently and that we constantly think about is just kind of like what Crystal said in our classroom libraries, is the diversity of books that we have and the characters that we have to showcase and also provide children with opportunities to see people different than they are. And so I had the opportunity recently to listen again to that TED Talk, The Single Story, The Danger of a Single Story, where, and I don't want to butcher her name, Shamanda, I think is her name, talked about how, when you kind of make assumptions about people because you have only that one idea of who they are, that can limit your ability to interact with other folks. And so through literature, it's a really great way at the elementary level to teach kids that, somebody's not weird because they're eating such and such at lunchtime. That's just the food that they make at their house, and that's okay. And Todd Parr books are great for that also because he draws characters in a way where nobody looks like anybody real. So they're all cartoony. So to be able to have conversations about what people look like and how you're special and unique without having to get into, well, you're this and you're that, and removing those identifiers for kids, I think is great. Also, I think it's important that we provide opportunities for kids that include choice and activities that can be provided at no cost so that everyone has a chance to participate. And like Christine said, to provide connection, so to make connections with people so that we meet kids and families where they are instead of where we think they are or assume that they are. I think those are all important things that we do at the elementary level. As a labor leader, I echo what Dr. MacArthur said as far as seats at the table. It's a conversation that we have a lot about who's making the decision, who gets input into the decision. We are fortunate to work in a district where we are listened to. I would always like to be listened to more, but we really do work in a great place. So the conversation is ongoing, and I think that's important. But we still make mistakes there and leave people out of the conversation that should be. And just thinking about our panel, because 6 out of 7 of us are women, which is awesome. But I just researched real quick. Right now, in 2017, 2018, the percentage of female teachers, 76% versus 24% male teachers, is an interesting kind of statistic as far as who we are and who represents us, and having more males at the table, which is a weird thing for me to say because I don't often say that, but to be representative, we've been talking about this too, to make sure that there's parity. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Let's go on to Melinda. Melinda, I know that you see a lot as an E&L teacher, so I'm interested to hear your response to this question. What does inclusion mean to you?
So inclusion means to me that all students have an equal opportunity to learn. And that's easy to say, but it's much more difficult to practice. So for me, that would mean not just adapting our lessons for E&L students, but actually designing them with E&L students in mind as part of a bigger population. Also, school in which all of our lessons and all of our extracurriculars not only recognize students' culture, but actually revere them and celebrate them and talk about them openly rather than trying to step around them. Let's really bring it into the forefront. And finally, a school in which this becomes a philosophy. And as we've been saying all morning, this is what we are adopting. So at risk of being repetitive, that paying attention and really focusing on needs of E&L students is not just a one-time shot, it's a philosophy. And again, that lessons and activities and all that we do for all students, really, there's a design, a fundamental design with the L's represented.
Great, thank you so much. And let's finish off with Joyce. You're a high school history teacher as well as a Dignity Club advisor. So I think you probably have some unique things to share.
Yes, and not to be so repetitive with what everybody else is saying. Difficult, but the Dignity Club started about 2014, and it was in response to DACA, and to be able to make sure that all students felt comfortable in a place where there was no bullying. And so the club has been a great source for students to come and discuss what happens to them, or what they see as issues in the building, and be able to address it. So we've done a lot of things with culture and being able to educate the rest of the school on different abilities or different races or different religions or parts of that. And as a history teacher, I think I am in a unique position because I think that history education is one way to build empathy and for students to be able to see themselves and to learn about other cultures as well, and to not lump people into maybe a broader definition of what they are or who they are, but really what their social identity is at the time. Because I think that diversity doesn't always necessarily mean the social identity, but it could also mean a diverse opinion as well. And so being able to have respectful discourse in the class is one important way that we can meet our DEI policy that we have now. And, I'm lucky that I'm able to teach that history education and allow students to see themselves, like I said before, but also that they can see local issues as well. And I think that if they're more invested if they understand that the history takes place right here. And so I address that in my class as well.
Thank you for that, and thank you for pointing out that diversity is more than just social identity, right? It's diversity of thought, it's how we learn, it's all of it. And I think sometimes in the conversation that's happening now much more broadly, we are really making the definition of diversity much more narrow than it really is. So thank you for pointing that out. And Melinda, you said something really interesting. It's easy to say providing an equal opportunity for everyone to learn, but that's much more difficult to put into practice, right? And so, we all have a role to play in all of the different perspectives that we bring. And even though we have 7 people, on the panel right now, perhaps all of you could serve on a panel somewhere because it takes everyone in a school building from our individual roles. So thank you for your responses to that question. Mr. DiTomaso, I want to come back to you, and I'd like you to ask you to share an example of your experience with diversity, equity, and inclusion in the district. Something that stands out to you that, is being done really well, something that perhaps, you think that we can improve upon, anything that comes to your mind.
An initiative that immediately comes to mind is at the high school, the I Am Malala initiative, in which the staff and students read this novel, and the high school staff did a tremendous job of bringing that forth and sharing a unique perspective that I think we can all relate to. And I think that's an instant connection to, of course, diversity, equity. And, I did not have the opportunity to publicly thank them, but they had a trivia game, which involved the students. They had a reading that involved the students, staff, and administrators, and I think it had a big impact on the district.
Great, thank you. Joyce, let's come to you. An experience that you've had with diversity and inclusion belonging in the district.
I think that my first experience in inclusion are the ICT classes, and the fact that as a gen ed teacher, when I was hired when I first started teaching ICT and had a co-teacher, I learned about the diversity of abilities. So I think it builds tolerance for the other students that are there and to understand differences that people learn in different ways. Other things that I've done in my classroom, I think I can say some things about being able to bring in other voices, like we said before. I think that when I first started, the way that the textbooks were, there was some history that included maybe only some African American history, but being able to bring in other things from the LGBTQ movement, I was able to do the classes. And I For my master's degree, I did a curriculum called Civil Rights on Long Island, so last year we were able to implement it in our trade classes to show how that didn't happen somewhere far away, but it happened right here in Malvern, and Whiskey, and other places like that. So just being able to bring more voices into the classroom, I think is what my goal is.
Thank you so much. How about we go to Melinda's same question? Can you share an example with diversity and inclusion in the district?
Sure. So I've been in the district for a long time teaching ELS, and there has been a huge amount of change from the time that I started to today, which is very positive change with much more equity and inclusion. The state implemented CR 154 changes, which required us to go from standalone services or teaching the kids just in our own little world to being inclusive, and now, majority of the day is co-taught classes. I think that's a great shift because it then forces us to look at how are we teaching everyday classes? How are we designing them? How are we making it accessible to our ELs? And I have seen in the district a shift from comments like they can't, or I don't have time for this, or they just don't, to what else can I do to help these students? And it is so special and rewarding to me when I have teachers come asking that, not only for their lessons, for their assessments, but for extracurriculars and sports. And that is just such a great accomplishment that we have all done together. And I hope that, and I know that it will continue. So that's
Great, thank you so much, Gail. How about you? An experience with diversity and inclusion in the district?
Sure. Years and years ago, I had the opportunity to help create a presentation that eventually led, was a little step in many steps that led to us starting our ICT program at the elementary level. Just a shout out to Maureen Sheeran over at RAIM, who was the first gen ed teacher in that co-taught class. And that first parent teacher night, I wasn't in that class, but I was a grade level partner. That first parent teacher night, parents, I can remember a parent coming up to me, not in my class, and kind of yelling at me about how dare we put her son in with those kids. And it was like this whole thing. And then she went through the parent teacher evening, and the teachers, de-escalated. And it shifted from how dare we put kids in with those kids to I need to get my kid in the ICT class. They have 2 teachers. They have 2 grown-ups. They do great things. I want my kid in the ICT class. And that shift came, similar to what you're saying, from a whole lot of work by a whole lot of people to educate and include a different kind of population. It is not perfect. Our special educators would probably say that they are not always at the table when it's time to make decisions about things. But the shift that we have made to include, and just as a community, I think as an East Rockaway community, has been great.
Great, thank you so much. Christine, how about you, an experience with diversity and inclusion in the district?
One experience actually that happened last year was that one of the students wanted to be known as a particular thing, and we were not aware of it at first. So that communication, I think, is so important when we are dealing with the kids. I know how to address the kids and not offend somebody. One of the administrators finally came to us and shared with us what was going on and how that student wanted to be addressed, which, we were all fine with. But that communication, I think, needs to be opened up just a little bit more, because I think we're in a lot of situations where we really listen to these kids in certain situations, especially now that certain areas are opened up in the high school, like the red bench area, either at lunchtime. A lot of kids come to us, they confide in us, they want us to be those good listeners. I think, the support staff here is fantastic, and a lot of the teachers also, but I think from administration, from my perspective, that a little bit more communication so I can respect that child and address them as they wanted to be addressed would have been helpful.
Well, being in the library really affords me the opportunity to interact with all of the students who come in. Some of those students are not, students who are arduous in their classrooms and who want to do their work. When they come to the library, they have a different experience, and they're happier. They feel a weight has been lifted off. Just recently, this past week, a student who is known not to do any work last year and this year, she comes to the library and she sees a book on the shelf and says, "Can I take out this book? This girl looks like me." And so that really struck a chord with myself and Mrs. Cooney, because we're happy to see that students are seeing themselves represented in the books that are in the library. We also make it a point to say that this is the students' library, this is their library. And so if they don't see any books on topics that interest them, we tell them, let us know what you want so we can order it for you. This is your space. We want you to feel welcome here. And so we've created a Google form on our library website where students can enter in those titles of books, or they can just really tell us, and we create a handwritten list as well. And we always let the students know either by email or when we see them again when there's a book that they have selected and chosen has come in. And this really makes the students feel special and welcome, and to know that their voice is being heard and they have a place to go to while they're here. Also, in our school library, we added a foreign language collection in Spanish. A lot of our E&L students were told to go to the library and pick out a book, but their first language is in English. So to fill that need, we started ordering books, not just any books, but books that were reviewed, that had star ratings on them for titles in Spanish. We also tried to mirror those books in English so that when students need to practice out of their foreign language, their primary language content, they can move over to English. Also, we encourage students who are taking Spanish now, hey, try to pick up a book in Spanish. We have different levels, even picture books even, that may interest you. See if you can try reading some of it. So really, it has helped to include all students in our library.
Great, thank you so much for that.
So I think back to last year, we had a kindergarten student who I looked at as twice exceptional, not in the way that twice exceptional is usually characterized, but he needed special education services and E&L services. And that was a challenge for us because our school, we specialize in providing services to students who are in integrated co-teaching classes, self-contained classes, and some resource room, but we don't have any students who also have a need for language support. So instead of looking at that challenge as from a deficit model of all the things that we don't have to meet the students' needs, so then we would look at the child as a deficit, we approached it much differently and looked at this as an opportunity to see who in the building has expertise with E&L strategies and different techniques that we could use to help this kindergartner. By doing that, we were really able to customize a program that helped him to really feel like he was a part of the classroom, to help him to be able to access the curriculum, but to also be able to get the support that he needed in both special education and in E&L services. So that also presents a challenge for us. This year at the elementary schools, we've seen an increase in student population. Our schools are small, of course. However, at almost every grade level, we have 2 to 3 new students in every class. So that ends up being pretty substantial. What we're noticing between both schools is a lot of our new students this year come from diverse backgrounds. So that is definitely a benefit. We, again, had the same challenge this year of getting a little kindergartner who required both services. So we had some experience with it last year, and we hit the ground running with how can we provide him the best level of support. But now it's increased to not just 1, but 2 students. So our challenge at this point, I think moving forward, we're at a great place to be able to take a look at how can we start to leverage our resources so that we can truly meet the comprehensive needs of our students as they come in. We don't want to have a fixed mindset of, well, they can't do this, so we need this kind of support and this kind of support, because then that takes the onus off of me as a principal, off of the classroom teacher as the one who builds a relationship, and just leaves the child by the wayside. We want to be more inclusive, so we want to start to take a look at how can we make them feel, students who come to us that are twice exceptional in a different way. How can we make them feel that they are a part of the learning experience when it's difficult for them to even access learning? So what barriers can we, do we have at our disposal? Like what resources do we have at our disposal to be able to remove some of those barriers for students to access learning? Because they're trying to learn the language and there's also an identified learning disability. I think it's a great place to be in because I love a challenge. And fortunately, I have a lot of teachers who also love a challenge. But when our students walk through the doors with additional needs that are not the traditional needs of the students who are already sitting in our classrooms, I also don't want their first experience when they hit that door to be, oh, another student who doesn't speak the language, or what am I going to do? I want there to be that same excitement for the new student who has some needs that are definitely going to challenge and stretch us as educators to be welcomed and included in different ways, just like every other student. So I'd say my experience has been almost baptism by fire because we had to come up with something creative. But I also am looking forward to the opportunity to see how we can start to maybe reallocate our resources to truly meet the range of needs that we're going to be faced with in the years to come.
Thank you, and you already started to answer questions, Ray, and I know you have to leave 2 minutes early, so please feel free to do so. But one of the things that, is there a question? Yeah, I'm sorry. Could you put something to grant the deadline? Yeah. I'm really trying to listen. Yeah, I'm sorry. I in fact turned off my mic, so I know that it's not. But thanks for hanging in there.
Could we try turning off mics when you're not using them and see if that improves it? That was different last time. People watching, they have it work.
See, this is the perfect example of when you. Thank you. Thank you for that. So. So, one of the themes that, kept coming out in your responses is responsiveness, right, to children and to individual needs. And, I recently had the opportunity in my own district to work with a superintendent who used to ask us all the time and challenge everybody with a very, very simple question. What have you done for a kid today? What have you done for a family today? And the question wasn't, what have you done for kids, plural. It was, what have you done for individual children today to make a difference? And when I was listening to your responses to the question, just the, teachers shifting a mindset to what else can I do to help a child is something that, sounds so simple, but can make such a difference, right, in the future of that child. And so it's so great to hear those things. I have one more question, and the question, Aisha, you really started to go into some details. What are some of the things the school community can do to further enhance the dignity of all students?
It's really important to use the mic because otherwise, so when you get your turn to turn on, that way they can hear you, you don't know. That's okay.
I'm hoping okay, it's back on. Okay. So I think that the dignity aspect is so important because we have to, I think the easiest way for us to enter this work around equity and inclusivity is to anchor it in dignity. And we think about dignity, that's really simple. It's what we all deserve as human beings. It's not something that's earned. It's not like respect. It's not like achievement. However, when we think about how schools are structured, we structure it around respect and achievement. We give to students based on what they give to us, instead of just looking at the fact, and I believe one of my colleagues said earlier, just meeting people where they are. We don't always look at truly meeting students where they are as human beings and what they deserve. They may be having a rough day. They may be going through some challenges at home. That should not impact how we treat them, because as human beings, we all deserve the same level of just basic dignity. And so the pillars around dignity that we should focus on as school communities in a district: patience, empathy, openness, listening, which are a lot of the things that we've already shared here. And they sound very simple, but how do those things really play out in the life of our school? How do those things really play out in teaching and learning in every building? How do those things play out in just the hidden and explicit curriculum in every single school? So how does the way that we treat children and staff members, because there's another element to that, it's not just students, it's also staff members, in a way that respects who they are just at the basic human level? I think that's where we have to start when we're thinking about the work of dignity with our students. We're getting a lot more education, at least I am, in the last, 5 to 7 years, about different perspectives on identity with students. And sometimes I think about, I don't really think about that with staff, but that's something that I should also consider. So as much as we don't want to focus all of our efforts on the negative of attacking certain issues, I do think that it would behoove us to become more knowledgeable on the discourse around identity, because the way that we walk into our school buildings, our own identity, it definitely colors our experiences with our colleagues and with our students. And it colors our ability to be able to look at students from a basic human level. So I think that it's kind of dignity for all in our schools is kind of a two-pronged approach, looking at and having an awareness of how your identity actually forms your experiences with students and colleagues. And then how do we move towards looking at students at just the basic human level of what they deserve, that listening, that empathy, being able to be open and having patience. Those pillars sound simple, but can be very complicated in the life of everything that we do at school. But that's the starting.